Well, hello everyone, and welcome to ADMG 474, Chapter 4. Let's get started. We are going to review Chapter 4, which is on chartering projects, and out of the PMBOK, we're talking about Chapter 3, Project Management Processes. So in the last chapter, we were looking at organizational structure and culture and how it impacts project management, and this week we are going to begin to start looking at the process of really working with our project by starting with a project charter. So what is a project charter? A project charter is that contract between the project team and the project sponsor. It is that agreement that we enter into between the two, and it can't arbitrarily be changed. It offers something of value to each party. It is a living document. A lot of people think that a project charter is a formal, concrete document, and it is not. It is a living document that can change and can evolve along the way. But what it really represents is the transition between the project initiating stage to the project planning stage. It's that document that once we have finished it, it means that we can officially move into project planning. We can get this project off the ground. A project charter is used to authorize the project manager to proceed, and it helps us to develop a common understanding between the project manager, the project team, and the project sponsor of exactly what we're going to do. We're going to have a scope of work defined. We're going to have a number of deliverables defined. So we are going to develop that common understanding between all parties of what this project really means and what we're going to do. And it helps creates commitment because we're going to get signatures on this, and those signatures are going to be ever so important in terms of gaining access to resources, access to funding. That that project charter helps us create that commitment, and it also is an awesome opportunity to help us screen out poor projects. Typical elements in a project charter include things like the title of the project. What are we going to name or call this project? A scope overview, business case background, milestone schedule. Other things that we include in a project charter are the risk, assumptions, and constraints. Spending approvals and budget estimates. You need to go into a project with an idea of how much it's going to cost. Now, we may not have an exact budget, but we ought to have a decent idea. I mean, that needs to kind of be negotiated. And it should be pretty good in terms of, we shouldn't go into a project asking for $20,000 and then it turns out that after all of our planning, we need $100,000, right? So we need to do some good work on the budgeting. Communications plan requirements. What does our project sponsor want to know and when? Some of our team operating principles, some of the lessons learned. And what we want to do is we want to validate in the lessons learned. We want to confirm that we've gone out to other projects and we've learned everything there is that we can then apply to this project to avoid problems or mistakes. And then again, finally, those signatures and commitments. So let's talk about the scope overview. It's a high-level description of what and how. It really is the project in a nutshell. Now, the product scope are the features and functions that categorize the product, service, or result, features or functions. Now, thinking in terms of requirements, requirements are conditions or capabilities that are required to be present in the product. So different. Product scope, features and functions, higher level than the requirements. Now, requirements start to get into pulling apart and detailed definition of the features and the functions, okay? So keep in mind, you usually have the scope, which is a little broader perspective. Requirements are that deep dive into what that product is actually going to do. And again, considering the scope overview statement, it's used to help prevent scope creep because we use project boundaries as part of our scope overview. We specifically say what is in scope and what is out of scope for the project, what we will do, what we will not do. We set project boundaries, in scope and out of scope, are phrases that you'll hear frequently. And when we define it up front in the project charter, it helps us later on when people come to us to add scope to the project that was originally defined as being out of scope. Okay, so it's important that we understand what those project boundaries are, get them negotiated up front as part of the project charter so that we can qualify and we can maintain what we really will be doing. Quantifying the scope helps us understand the project size. Remember I talked about we want to get down to budgeting. Well, we need to know how big this project is. What are we really going to need here? Scope creep, as mentioned up above, is an uncontrolled expansion of what we're going to do as part of that project. And when we have uncontrolled expansion of the project scope, it ends up impacting the time it's going to take us to complete it, how much it's going to cost, and how many resources we are going to need. How do we control scope to avoid scope creep? Through change management. We'd use change management judiciously to manage the scope of work so that we manage our time, cost, and resources. Business case is the next section that we need to be concerned about in our project charter. Now, business case represents the why. Why are we doing this? It provides the justification for the project. It helps to justify the necessity. It ties back to the organizational strategy. Remember that we never do projects that don't have some tie to the organizational strategy in some way, shape, or form. It provides a rationale and a high-level cost-benefit discussion. Why are we doing it? What's it going to cost us, but what are we going to get for our money? Why is this important? It also persuades and inspires decision makers and team members because we're putting a good purpose out there. We need to do this because project background, and that's used to provide more detail to support the scope statement and the business case. The project background statement is often optional, but it's very important because the background will help us to frame the discussion of why this is so important. Because we can go back and we can talk about the is situation, the as is, and we can discuss the to be, where we want to be, and why it's important that we get there. So project background, good thing to have. Often you see it as optional. The next section in our charter might be milestone schedule with acceptance criteria. And what a milestone does is it divides the project into points of time whose completion can be verified. So what we typically do is we typically look at our deliverables, and we typically say along the project's execution when certain deliverables are completed. They represent a significant amount of work that's been completed. So often we can use that as a milestone. Okay, so we've achieved this significant amount of work. We've hit this milestone. So we want to consider milestones as summary level schedule points that identify a major schedule milestone or significant point or event in the project that we can point to and say, okay, we hit this point, we've completed a significant amount of work. Now let's talk about it. Now let's analyze it and review that. Acceptance criteria is a very important part because what acceptance criteria does is it helps to determine whether what we've done meets what was expected. And when we put together our milestone schedule, we always want to specify how we will accept that we've achieved what we said we were going to do. So how will we judge the quality of the deliverable, and by what criteria? Acceptance criteria represents the project's vital signs. Never turn in a deliverable without knowing how it will be judged. How are you going to say that that deliverable met the requirements or the criteria that was expected? It's something of value will be delivered at each iteration. So again, a definition from the PMBOK on acceptance criteria is that it's the standards, rules, or tests by which a product, service, or result will be evaluated. And really that's kind of a criteria, right? As criteria is the standard by which something will be determined to be good. Okay. So, from the reading, here's what you should be concentrating and focusing on. Why do we need a project charter? And we discussed that it authorizes the project and identifies the key stakeholders and project sponsor. It identifies the scope of work in the business case, and it helps clarify project goals and intentions, and in order to create that common understanding. Please review the decision matrix, Exhibit 4.2. There's some great discussion on the need for a project charter on various types of projects. Not all projects need a project charter. Depends on the size of the project, depends on what kind of project it is. So be sure you know when and how we put together different types of project charters based on that type of charter. What are some elements of the project charter? Well, we've discussed a handful of them so far. This is a chapter that we will cover in 2 modules in the course. So we will finish the project charter in the next module. So we're going to stop at this point, and we will, in the next module, we'll cover part 2 of this particular chapter. But right now, what are some of the elements of the project charter? You want to look at Exhibit 4.3. I absolutely love how these questions are answered. The what, why, when, what, whoa, how much, who, how, and who. So when you go and look at Exhibit 4.3, what I just said there should make a whole lot more sense to you. But they're really, really good questions because the project charter helps us answer all of those important questions about the project itself. So read through all sections carefully. This will help you thoroughly and understand the components from page 87 to 91. This is going to be important as you will need this information to work through your assignment this week. Review constructing a project charter, and now those processes are described on page 91 through 99. Pay special attention to the 6 steps of constructing a milestone schedule, because you are going to be putting together a milestone schedule, and I have most often seen people really not understand what a milestone is and how to put together a milestone schedule. Please go over page 92 through 94 carefully, because it will help you. Now, your assignment stops at this point. I do encourage you to read the whole chapter, but you will be finishing the chapter next week. However, your quiz will cover everything in the chapter, so you might want to have the chapter read. Be sure to read the exhibits. They will provide important examples that will become very helpful to you as you go through the process. Don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions. I hope you enjoy this section.